So let's get into our inventory of forms. We're going to start with an extrusion. The extrusion we've already been introduced to in the previous chapter. It's a basic sketch-based form. You draw out a shape, any shape you like. It does have to be an enclosed shape, so you can't have any open chains of lines or anything, but it doesn't have to be a regular shape. You can make it any irregular shape you like. And you actually can create holes in your extrusion by creating more than one form nested within one another. The only rule is each form has to be closed and they can't overlap one another. But as you can see from my illustration here, it's just basically a form with a height. So that height is actually numeric. You type it in, so it's not something we draw. So we're only drawing the one form. So to illustrate some of the features of the extrusion, I'm going to create a brand new family, and this is going to be a throwaway family. I'm not actually going to save this at the end, so feel free to follow along in any file you like. I'm going to just use a generic model for this example. A generic model is sort of a non-category. It's good if you're really not sure what category you need or if the category that you are thinking of doesn't really exist in Revit. So I'm going to tile the windows, zoom them all. I just did WT for window tile and ZA for zoom all. So we've discussed reference planes and work planes, and we know that the view that we're active in will help establish that. For this example, I'm going to just work in plan view. I don't really care so much about the work plane. I'll go to extrusion, and we're going to look at these different shapes here. So we've done rectangles already. Let me just switch to maybe something a little different. So I'll do a polygon. The default is 6 sides. I'll draw it right here at the center and maybe out to a 2-foot radius. What I've been doing up until now has been ignoring the depth parameter. That is controlling how tall this extrusion is. And so you do have a few options. You can actually change the depth before you finish the form. Maybe I want this to be 4 feet tall, so I can plug in the number 4 here before I click finish. And you'll see that the height of this thing will be a little larger than what it has been previously. But of course, you can always change that depth later. The depth is also expressed here on the properties palette. So this is something we haven't really looked at too much before, and I'd like to kind of discuss this now. We have talked about the work plane in other movies. So in this case, we see that the work plane is on the reference level. The extrusion itself, the height of the extrusion, even though it's expressed as a depth right here, is actually 2 numbers. There's the extrusion start and the extrusion end. So if we direct our attention to one of the elevation views and I start fiddling with some of these numbers, you'll see how this behaves. Suppose I set the extrusion start to -2 feet and click apply. What will happen is if you look down in the front view or the left view at the bottom of my screen, you'll notice that this extrusion has just dropped below the ground plane. And if you look on the options bar, you see that the total depth is now 6 feet. So Revit kind of does the math for us. So I can start at any absolute point and I can end at any absolute point. And then the result is just the math being done between those two. So either of these can be a positive or a negative number. So this is one more thing to consider in addition to your work plane is both the positive and negative extrusions. In some of the future movies, we're also going to look at these little buttons over here. I just want to point them out right now, though, and say that this is a way that you can actually link up parameters to this extrusion and make these values parametric. You could put dimensions on the form, as we saw in the last chapter, but if I click this little button here, I have the ability to actually link up a parameter directly to that value. And again, that parameter would be a number, and it could be either positive or a negative number. If I have a reason to do that to drive and control the shape of this form, that's another option that I have available to me. So the way that you structure the work plane, the start point, the end point, all kind of factor into your overall strategy for how you want to build this form. But otherwise, pretty simple, straightforward form. If I create another one, of course, we have really any shape we like, but just remember, the shape must be closed. If you try to finish it before you close the form, you'll get this error message here. So I could click continue and say, oh yeah, I need to finish up my form. That gives me the extrusion. If I decide I want to cut a hole in this form, I can do edit extrusion and I can add another form inside of it. And then it will extrude as a hollow, basically. You can have as many closed loops as you want inside that extrusion. It's all in the single sketch. But what they can't do is overlap one another. If I took this circle and I did this, and I try to finish it, Revit will complain about that too. As long as you make a valid sketch, really pretty much any shape that you like is acceptable. It's by far our simplest form. Extrusions are the simplest of our 5 forms. We need only the single sketch, as we've seen, to create them and an appropriate work plane. But despite their simplicity, extrusions are widely used in most families and really are the staple of form creation.